Hey there, welcome to Dread Lullabies. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. You know, they say the night is for resting, but for some, the darkness is where the real world begins. Tonight, I've put together a few true stories that are meant to be heard in the quiet. Stories that remind us that sometimes the things that go bump in the night are more real than we'd like to believe. Before we get lost in the dark, I'd love to know where you're joining me from. So feel free to drop a comment and tell me where you're listening tonight. And if you find yourself coming back for more, maybe consider liking the video and subscribing. It really helps me keep these lullabies going for you. So, pull up the covers, get comfortable, and let's see what the night has in store for us. I was about 10 years old, on vacation with my family. We were staying near Wildwood, and one afternoon my aunt decided to take me and my cousin to the boardwalk. My cousin was younger than me, maybe 3 or 4 years younger, and he looked up to me a lot, so I felt responsible for him in that older kid way you do when you're just barely not a little kid anymore yourself. At some point, we decided to go on Dante's Dungeon, one of those classic haunted boardwalk rides. I had already been on it before, so I wasn't scared going in. I knew it was cheesy, dark, full of fake scares and jumpy noises. Nothing about it felt threatening to me. I remember feeling kind of proud that I wasn't afraid, especially since my cousin was younger and a bit nervous. The ride started like normal. Our little cart moved slowly through dimly lit scenes. Creepy sounds, fake monsters popping out. Then we reached a section that was completely pitch black. No lights at all. You couldn't see your own hands in front of your face. I remember gripping the side of the cart, more because it was disorienting than because I was scared. That's when I heard a man's voice. It came from right behind us, close enough that it felt like he was leaning forward into our space. He sounded calm, conversational, not loud or theatrical like the ride noises. He started asking me questions. Simple questions, my name, how I was doing, just casual, friendly stuff, like someone trying to make small talk. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. I thought maybe it was part of the ride, some kind of live actor I hadn't encountered before, but something about it felt wrong. The voice wasn't echoing or distorted. It was too real, too close. Then the fear hit me. I suddenly realized I couldn't feel my cousin next to me. In the darkness, I didn't know if he had shifted in his seat, if the cart had moved, or if something else had happened. Panic started creeping up my spine. I turned my head toward where he should have been and asked out loud where he was. The man answered immediately. He said very calmly, "Oh, he's right here, don't worry." That was the moment my body went completely cold. The voice was still right near my ear, on the side where my cousin had been sitting. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my head. I remember feeling frozen, like I couldn't scream or move or even breathe properly. Everything in me knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what to do. I was a kid, stuck in a moving cart in total darkness, with an adult voice speaking to me like it knew exactly what was happening. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the cart moved forward and burst back into the light. We came out of the dark section into a lit area, and I immediately looked around. There was no one behind us, no one in the cart, no ride operator leaning in, just me and my cousin, sitting exactly where we had been the whole time. I remember spinning around, my eyes wide, trying to find the man. My cousin looked confused, but calm, like nothing unusual had happened. He didn't seem shaken the way I was. The ride ended shortly after and we got out like normal, but I felt completely disconnected from everything around me. When we got back to the beach house, I told my dad what happened. I tried to explain it the best I could. How the voice had spoken to me in the dark. How it had answered when I asked about my cousin. How there was no one there when the lights came back on. My dad's reaction surprised me. He didn't brush it off or laugh it away. He got very serious very fast. He started asking me a lot of questions. Did the man touch you? Did he grab you? Did he poke you with anything? Did he say anything else? Did you feel anything? At the time, I didn't understand why he was so intense about it. I was confused and a little embarrassed, wondering if I had done something wrong by saying anything at all. I kept telling him, no, nothing like that happened. It was just the voice. Now, as a mother myself, I understand his reaction completely. Looking back, it sends a chill through me. The thought of how vulnerable kids are in situations like that, how quickly something could have gone from strange to horrific, makes my stomach turn. My dad wasn't overreacting. He was terrified of what could have happened. My cousin remembers the ride, but his memory of that moment is vague. He remembers being scared in the dark, but he doesn't remember the voice the way I do. For him, it faded into just another weird childhood memory. For me, it never did. It's been about 25 years and I still think about it. I still replay it in my head sometimes, trying to figure out what it was. Was it a ride malfunction, a prank, someone breaking rules, or something else entirely? I don't know, and I probably never will. What I do know is how real it felt, how close that voice was, how certain it sounded when it told me my cousin was right here, and how relieved I was when the lights came back on and nothing else had happened. It's one of those moments that sticks with you, not because something terrible did happen, but because of how easily it could have. An old friend of mine told me this story, and even though it didn't happen to me directly, it has stayed in my head for years. It's one of those stories that sounds exaggerated at first, almost like an urban legend, until you realize there are real names, real victims, and real news articles behind it. She had a girlfriend at the time, and the two of them, along with a small group of friends, went out to a bar one night. It was nothing unusual, just a normal night out. Music was loud, drinks were flowing, and everyone was in a good mood. At some point during the night, her girlfriend met a guy at the bar. He was described as handsome, charming, the kind of person who immediately stands out in a crowded room. They started talking, laughing, and before long they were making out near the dance floor. At first, everything seemed normal. But as they were kissing, she noticed something strange. His breath and taste were off. Not just bad breath, but something genuinely unpleasant, almost rotten. It threw her off for a moment, but she was pretty intoxicated, and in that state she brushed it aside. She figured maybe he had been drinking heavily, or maybe it was just her imagination. At the time, it didn't feel important enough to stop everything. As the night went on, he started pushing for more. He wanted to go back to her place. She wasn't feeling it. Whether it was the strange taste, her mood, or just a gut feeling, she decided she didn't want to take anyone home that night. When she told him no, his attitude changed immediately. He became visibly annoyed, frustrated in a way that felt disproportionate to the situation. He pressed a bit more, and when she held her ground, he backed off, but not gracefully. She didn't give him her phone number. She didn't give him her social media. She didn't want any further contact. Eventually, he disappeared back into the crowd, and the night ended without anything else happening. At the time, it just felt like an awkward encounter with a guy who didn't handle rejection well. About a week later, something strange happened. She developed a severe infection around her mouth. It wasn't just a small sore or irritation. It was bad. Painful blistering, swelling, redness. The kind of thing that makes you immediately worry that something is seriously wrong. Naturally, she went to the hospital and got tested. Given the timing, everyone assumed it might be some kind of sexually transmitted infection, but the tests came back negative. It wasn't herpes, it wasn't any known STD. Instead, doctors told her it was a serious bacterial infection. They treated it, but they couldn't give her a clear explanation for how she had gotten it. She was confused, unsettled, and honestly a little freaked out. The timing felt too precise to be a coincidence, but there was nothing concrete to point to. Life went on. The infection cleared up. The strange guy from the bar faded into the background of memory, just another uncomfortable experience in a long list of nights out. Then, about a month later, everything changed. The group was together again when someone mentioned a breaking news story. A man had been arrested. As they watched the report, her stomach dropped. It was him, the same guy from the bar, same face, same smile. No doubt about it. The news story was horrifying. He had been meeting women at bars, charming them, taking them home. Then he would murder them. After killing them, he would keep parts of their bodies and he would eat them. It wasn't speculation, it wasn't rumor, it was confirmed by police, backed by evidence, and already tied to multiple victims. Suddenly, everything snapped into place. The frustration when she said no. The insistence on going home together, the strange, rotten taste when they kissed, the unexplained bacterial infection afterward. One of her medical friends later told her that it was very possible the infection came from decayed flesh or severe bacterial contamination that was still present on his lips or in his mouth. The idea alone made everyone feel sick. When my friend first told me this story, I'll be honest, I thought it sounded too extreme to be true. It felt like one of those stories that grows darker every time it's retold. But then she showed me the news article, local coverage, names, dates, mugshots, court details. It was real. What haunts me the most about the story is how close she came. One different decision. One moment of giving in instead of saying no. One night where she ignored that uncomfortable feeling, and she could have been another name on that list, another victim people talked about in past tense. Instead, she trusted her instinct, even if she didn't fully understand it at the time. She walked away, and that decision likely saved her life. It's terrifying how ordinary the beginning of the story is. A bar, a handsome stranger, a kiss, no warning signs that scream danger. Just a subtle feeling that something isn't right. And it's even more terrifying to realize how many people don't get the chance to walk away. That's why this story sticks with me, not just because of how gruesome it became, but because of how close it came to being much worse for someone I indirectly knew. It's a reminder that sometimes the smallest red flags, the ones that feel easy to ignore, are the ones that matter the most. When I was in my 20s, we liked to go out to piano bars at night. It was just one of those phases of life where everything felt lighter, louder, and a little reckless. Piano bars felt classy, but still fun. A place where you could drink too much, sing along badly, and talk to strangers without it feeling strange. Most nights I went with friends, but that night I went alone. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was confident, independent, and used to taking care of myself. I had done it plenty of times before and nothing bad had ever happened, so I didn't see any reason to be worried. The bar was busy, the kind of busy where the noise wraps around you like a blanket. The piano player was taking requests, people were laughing, glasses were clinking, and everyone seemed happy in that slightly sloppy way that comes with drinking late into the night. I ordered a drink, then another. I remember feeling relaxed and loose, the way alcohol makes you feel, like the world is friendly and full of possibilities. I wasn't thinking about danger or consequences. I was just enjoying being young and out at night. That's when I met them. A group of Greek men struck up a conversation with me. They were charming at first, funny, loud in a way that fit the atmosphere of the bar. They had accents which I remember thinking was interesting and exotic at the time. We talked, laughed, and drank together. Nothing about it felt threatening in the beginning. If anything, it felt like one of those random nights that turns into a good story later. I didn't feel like I was doing anything unusual or risky. It felt normal. At some point in the conversation, they told me they had a submarine. Even now, writing that sentence, it sounds ridiculous. A submarine. At the time, though, I was drunk enough that it didn't immediately register how absurd that sounded. My brain didn't stop to question why a group of random guys at a piano bar would have access to a submarine, or why they would invite a stranger to see it. Alcohol has a way of smoothing over those sharp edges of logic. They asked if I wanted to see it. And unbelievably, I said yes. I still shake my head at that part. I wasn't trying to be reckless or daring. I wasn't thinking, this is dangerous. I was thinking, this is weird and interesting and kind of funny. I thought it would be some docked novelty thing, maybe a tourist attraction or something they were exaggerating for fun. I didn't imagine, not even for a second, that I was walking into something truly dangerous. We left the bar together. The night air hit me, cool and sharp compared to the warmth and noise inside. I remember stumbling slightly as we walked, laughing it off. They led me away from the main area, further than I expected. That's when a small part of my brain started to wake up. Something felt off, but I brushed it aside. I told myself I was just drunk and overthinking. When we reached the submarine, reality started to crash in all at once. It wasn't some harmless joke or tourist thing. It was real, and more importantly, there were more men there than I expected. They were waiting, standing around, watching me. The energy shifted instantly. The friendliness disappeared, replaced by something cold and heavy that made my stomach drop. It's hard to describe that moment when your body realizes you're in danger before your mind fully catches up. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The alcohol haze vanished in seconds, replaced by pure adrenaline. I suddenly became very aware of how alone I was, how far we were from the bar, how badly I had misjudged the situation. They started talking among themselves, looking at me in a way that made my skin crawl. I could tell they were discussing me, evaluating me. I don't remember every word, but I remember the tone. It wasn't playful, it wasn't harmless. There was violence in it, even if it hadn't happened yet. In that moment, I understood that whatever they had planned, it wasn't something I was going to walk away from easily. Fear is a strange thing. It can freeze you, but it can also sharpen you. Something inside me snapped into focus. I didn't think about being polite. I didn't think about not causing a scene. I didn't think about anything except getting away. I realized that if I hesitated, if I tried to reason or laugh it off, I might not get another chance. I turned and ran. I'm not athletic. I've never been particularly fast. But fear gave me speed I didn't know I had. I ran like my life depended on it, because deep down, I knew it did. I could hear shouting behind me, footsteps, confusion. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down. I just ran. At some point, I reached a wire fence. There was no time to think about how to get over it properly. I climbed and jumped in one desperate movement. The fence tore into me, ripping the back of my pants clean open. I felt it, the sharp pull and the sting, but I didn't stop. Pain didn't matter. Embarrassment didn't matter. Nothing mattered except distance. I kept running until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they were going to give out. Somehow, I made it back to the bar. The lights, the music, the people felt surreal, like stepping into a different world. I must have looked wild, breathless, shaken, clothes torn. I don't even remember if anyone noticed or asked what happened. I just remember sitting down and ordering another drink, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the glass. I needed that drink, not because I wanted to keep partying, but because I needed something familiar to ground me. My body was still in fight or flight mode, my heart racing, my thoughts scattered. I kept replaying what had just happened, trying to make sense of it, how close I had come, how easily it could have gone another way. Later, when I was finally safe and sober enough to really think about it, the weight of it hit me. I realized how naive I had been, how quickly a fun night could turn into something terrifying. I thought about all the small decisions that led up to that moment, going out alone, drinking too much, trusting strangers, saying yes without thinking. For a long time after that, I felt a mix of shame and disbelief. Shame that I had put myself in that situation, disbelief that I had escaped it. I kept thinking, I can't believe I was that dumb. Even now, years later, that thought still pops into my head sometimes. But with time, I've learned to look at it differently. I wasn't dumb, I was young, trusting, and living in a world that often tells people, especially women, that being friendly and open is a good thing. I didn't do anything wrong by going out, by talking to people, by wanting to see something interesting. The wrong was entirely on them. They were the ones who planned something violent. They were the danger, not my curiosity. That night changed me in quiet ways. I became more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. I stopped brushing off that little voice in my head that says something isn't right. I learned to trust my instincts, even if I can't immediately explain them. I learned that fear isn't weakness, it's information. Sometimes I think about how different my life could have been if I hadn't run, if I had hesitated for even a second longer. That thought still makes my chest tighten. I don't dwell on it too much, but it's always there, a reminder of how fragile things can be. I also think about how many people don't get away, how many stories don't end with someone running back to a bar with ripped pants and shaky hands. That realization stays with you. It makes you grateful, but it also makes you angry. Angry that situations like that exist at all. Angry that people can see another human being as something to rate, harm, or use. Looking back now, I can tell the story with a bit more distance. I can even see the dark irony in parts of it. The submarine, the absurdity of it all. But underneath that, the fear is still real. The memory is still sharp. I survived because I listened to my instincts at the last possible moment, and because my body reacted faster than my fear could paralyze me. I survived because I ran. That's something I'll never forget. And yes, to this day, I still can't believe I agreed to go see a submarine with strangers I met at a piano bar. But I also can't forget that I got myself out. That matters too. I had a girlfriend back in the 70s, and one of the stories she told me always stuck with me. It's one of those things that didn't seem especially terrifying at the time, but the older you get and the more you think about it, the heavier it feels. Her grandmother lived way out in the countryside, far from town and far from other people. This wasn't the kind of place where you had neighbors close enough to notice if something strange was happening. Her house sat alone, surrounded by open fields and trees, the kind of place where cars didn't pass by unless they had a reason to. If something went wrong out there, no one would hear it, and no one would come running. Her grandmother was an older woman, but she wasn't weak or timid. Living alone in a secluded area had made her sharp and cautious. She paid attention to her surroundings, noticed when things felt off, and didn't hesitate to protect herself. She kept a shotgun in the house, not for show, but because she understood what it meant to live that far from help. One day she noticed a man walking out of one of the fields near her house. He wasn't on the road. He wasn't heading toward a nearby home. He was just there, coming out of the tall grass like he'd been watching the place or cutting through the land. That alone was enough to set off alarms in her head. People didn't just wander through her property by accident. She didn't panic. She didn't hide. She stepped out onto her porch with the shotgun in her hands and made herself very visible. When the man saw her, she told him flat out that he had no business being there. Her voice was calm but firm. She told him to leave and made it clear she wasn't asking. She stood there on the porch the entire time, watching him closely as he walked away. She didn't turn her back. She didn't go inside until she was sure he was gone and no longer anywhere near her land. Only then did she lower the gun. At the time, it was just another strange encounter, something unsettling but not unheard of when you lived in a remote area. People wandered, people got lost. Sometimes you scared them off, and that was the end of it. Then, later on, the news broke. A serial killer had been caught in Georgia. His face was everywhere, on television and in newspapers. When my girlfriend saw his picture, her blood ran cold. She recognized him immediately. The man her grandmother had chased off her property with a shotgun was Paul John Knowles, who had been operating throughout Florida during that time. Suddenly, that brief encounter took on an entirely different meaning. That wasn't just some random guy cutting through a field. That was a man who had killed before and would kill again. A man who targeted people, often in isolated places where no one would hear or see what happened. If her grandmother hadn't trusted her instincts, if she hadn't been armed, if she had hesitated or stayed inside, there's no telling how that story might have ended. Living alone, far from neighbors, she could have easily become another victim, another name added to a list. Instead, she stood her ground. What makes the story even more chilling is how close it all was to never being known. If Knowles hadn't been caught, if his face hadn't been shown everywhere, that moment would have stayed just a strange memory with no clear explanation. A man in a field. A gun on a porch. A bad feeling that passed. But knowing who he really was changes everything. It turns a simple act of caution into something that likely saved her life. Every time I think about it, I'm struck by how thin the line can be between an ordinary day and a tragedy. One decision, one moment of awareness, one person who refuses to ignore their instincts. Her grandmother didn't know his name at the time, but she knew one thing for sure. He didn't belong there, and that knowledge made all the difference. A couple was biking on a frontage road in my town when they were struck and killed in a hit and run. It was one of those quiet roads people used all the time, especially couples, joggers, and cyclists who wanted to avoid traffic. The kind of place where you don't expect something like that to happen. When it did, it shook everyone. What made it worse was how little evidence there was. The businesses on that side of the road didn't have cameras positioned in a way that could see the actual impact. The only cameras that caught anything were from the late-night fast food places across the highway. From those videos, investigators could only make out one detail: a light-colored sedan. No license plate, no clear make or model, just that vague description. That was it. That was all anyone had to go on. Time passed, but the case never really left people's minds. In a town our size, things like that don't fade easily. Everyone talked about it in hushed tones. Everyone speculated. Everyone wondered who could have done it and just driven away, leaving two people dead on the road. About a year later, a friend of mine matched with a guy on a dating app. It was her first time meeting him, and she was nervous, so she asked me to come along and smoke with them. She didn't want to be alone with someone she didn't know yet, and I understood that instinct completely. I agreed without thinking much of it. When he pulled up, I noticed right away that he was driving a light-colored sedan. That alone wouldn't normally mean anything. Light-colored cars are common. But the moment I got into the car, something felt off. It wasn't anything obvious. He wasn't aggressive or creepy in a way you could easily point to. It was just a feeling, a heaviness, the kind of discomfort that makes your shoulders tense without you realizing it. I remember sitting there, trying to act normal, trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. We smoked, talked a little, and then went our separate ways. I never saw him again after that. Eventually, I let it go. At least, I thought I did. Another year passed. By then, I was working at a hotel in town. A lot of the staff were people I'd gone to school with, or family friends, or friends of friends. That's how it is in a smallish town with one high school. Everyone overlaps in some way. You might not know everyone well, but you recognize faces, you know names, you know histories. As the anniversary of the hit and run was coming up, the topic resurfaced. One day at work, a co-worker who was also a close family friend brought it up. She mentioned that she had long suspected an old co-worker of hers might have been responsible. She said she'd always found him a little odd, not in a dramatic way, just off. The kind of person who never quite fit, who made you uneasy without doing anything outright wrong. Then she started listing things that made her suspicions stronger. He had called in sick the day after the hit and run. At the time, no one thought much of it. People get sick, but in hindsight, it stood out. Not long after the incident, he showed up to work driving a different car than usual. Normally, he drove a light-colored sedan, but that day, it was something else. When she asked him about it, he told her he'd taken his sedan to a family friend, a few hours away because he had hit a deer the night before. He said he didn't want to take it to a shop because his friend would be cheaper. The timing was strange. The explanation felt thin. This co-worker wasn't the type to let things slide. She was direct, blunt, and not afraid of uncomfortable conversations. Eventually, she asked him something straight up about the hit and run. Not accusing him outright, but enough to make it clear she was suspicious. He quit after that shift. Just like that. No notice, no explanation. He was gone. As she was telling me all of this, my stomach dropped. My mind went back instantly to that night a year earlier, to the dating app meetup, to the light-colored sedan, to the way I had felt the moment I got into that car. I asked her what the guy looked like. She described him. It was him. I don't remember his name anymore. That detail has faded with time, but I will never forget his face. I will never forget the way he looked at me through the rearview mirror that night. There was nothing overtly threatening about it, and that's what makes it worse. Just a glance. Just a presence that made something deep in my gut say, something is wrong here. We talked about calling the police. In fact, people did. Tips were made. But by then, years had passed. There was no physical evidence left. No car. No damage to inspect. Nothing concrete. All anyone had were suspicions and coincidences, and that's not enough to build a case. Nothing ever came of it. The couple who died never got justice. Their families never got answers. And the person who may have done it just disappeared from the story, moving on with his life as if nothing had happened. That's the part that stays with me the most. The idea that you can brush past someone in such an ordinary moment, sit in their car, share a casual conversation, and never know that they might be carrying something like that with them. Something horrific, something unresolved. Sometimes I think about how close it all felt without actually touching me. How easily it could have been dismissed as coincidence if I hadn't later heard the rest of the story. How many people like that you might cross paths with in your lifetime and never realize it. I still think about the couple on their bikes, about how normal their day probably felt before it ended, about how senseless it all was. And every time I think back to that light-colored sedan, to that feeling in my chest, I trust my instincts a little more. Because sometimes, even when there's no proof, your body knows something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. When I was about 11 years old, my world was still pretty small. Our neighborhood felt like its own little universe, and the playground was the center of it. Every afternoon, especially during warmer months, kids from nearby houses would drift there. Some came with bikes, some with balls, some with nothing at all except time to kill before dinner. It was the kind of place where you didn't need to plan anything. You just showed up, and somehow everyone found something to do. I went there almost every day. It felt safe in the way only childhood places do. Parents could see the swings from their porches. Older kids kept an eye on the younger ones, and nothing ever really happened beyond scraped knees or arguments over whose turn it was on the slide. It was familiar, predictable, and comfortable. That changed the summer the new kid showed up. At first, there was nothing especially strange about him. He was just older. Most of us were around 10 or 11, maybe 12 at most. He looked a few years ahead of us, taller, broader, with that awkward, half-grown look teenagers sometimes have. We figured he must have just moved in, like kids sometimes do when families change or parents split up. That wasn't unusual. New kids came and went. But there was something about him that made everyone uneasy almost immediately, even if none of us could really explain why at the time. The first thing anyone noticed were his hands. They were covered in warts. Not just one or two, but a lot of them. They dotted his fingers, his knuckles, the backs of his hands. As kids, we didn't have the language to describe it politely, and we definitely didn't have the emotional tools to process discomfort in a healthy way. All we knew was that it looked wrong to us, and it made our stomachs turn. At first, we tried to ignore it. We kept playing, pretending he wasn't there. But he didn't just sit on the sidelines or quietly join in. He watched us in a way that felt intense, like he was studying how we moved, how we laughed, how we reacted to each other. Then he started chasing us. He would run toward us with his hands stretched out, fingers spread wide, shouting and laughing, trying to touch us. He made it into a game, or at least he acted like it was a game. He'd yell things like, "I'm gonna get you," and wave his hands in our faces. Some of the kids screamed and ran, others froze. A few laughed nervously, unsure if they were supposed to be scared or amused. I remember the feeling in my chest when he came toward me. It wasn't just fear of getting touched. It was something deeper, something instinctive. My body reacted before my brain could explain why. My heart would race, my skin would crawl, and all I wanted to do was get away from him as fast as possible. We tried telling him to stop. He didn't listen. We tried asking him to play something else. He didn't care. The more uncomfortable we were, the more he seemed to enjoy it. After a while, kids started making excuses not to go to the playground anymore. Someone would say their mom needed them to stay home. Someone else would claim they were sick. Slowly, without ever really discussing it openly, we all stopped going. The playground, once full of noise and movement, became quiet. At the time, it felt like a simple solution. If the place made us uncomfortable, we'd just avoid it. None of us thought much beyond that. We were kids. We didn't think about why he acted the way he did, or what was going on in his life. We just knew we didn't want to be around him. I later learned that he had moved into the neighborhood that summer to live with his dad and his dad's girlfriend. His parents had recently divorced, and he had been sent to live with his father. Again, at the time, this detail meant nothing to me. Divorce was something that happened to other families, something adults talked about in hushed voices. It didn't feel connected to a kid chasing us around a playground. Months passed. Summer ended. School started again. Life moved on. Then the news broke. I don't remember exactly how I found out. It might have been through my parents talking quietly in the kitchen. It might have been something another kid mentioned in a whisper at school. What I do remember is the shock, the way the words didn't seem real at first, like someone had mixed up facts or exaggerated a rumor. Before he even turned 15, that boy stabbed his dad's girlfriend to death in their home. He used a kitchen knife. The reason, according to what eventually came out, was that he blamed her for his parents' divorce. I remember sitting with that information, trying to make sense of it, and failing completely. My 11-year-old brain couldn't connect the kid who chased us at the playground with the idea of murder. It felt like those were two different worlds, two different kinds of people. Monsters did things like that. Not kids you'd seen running around in sneakers and a t-shirt. But as I got older, the memory started to change shape in my mind. I thought about his behavior differently, the way he didn't respect boundaries, the way he seemed to enjoy making others uncomfortable, the way there was something off in his eyes, even if I couldn't name it at the time. I thought about how angry he must have been, how confused, how alone. None of that excuses what he did. Not even close. But it made me realize that the signs were there, even if we didn't understand them. What haunts me most isn't just the crime itself. It's how close it all felt. This wasn't some distant story on the news about strangers in another city. This was someone who had stood a few feet away from me, someone who had laughed and chased and waved his hands in my face. Someone who shared the same streets, the same park, the same summer air. I sometimes think about his dad's girlfriend, about what her life must have been like leading up to that moment, about the tension in that house, the anger simmering under the surface. I think about how she probably never imagined that a teenager would be the one to take her life. I think about how sudden and senseless it all was. And I think about us, the kids at the playground, how our instincts told us something was wrong long before we had any facts. We didn't have words like red flags or warning signs. We just knew we didn't feel safe. We listened to that feeling without really understanding it, and we stayed away. Even now, years later, that story sticks with me. It's one of those moments that quietly reshapes how you see the world. It taught me that danger doesn't always look like what you expect, that sometimes it looks like a kid, only a few years older than you, smiling and laughing while doing something that makes your skin crawl. It also taught me how thin the line can be between weird and tragic, how quickly things can escalate, how much pain can exist behind behavior that people dismiss as just odd or uncomfortable. I don't think about him often, but when I do, it's always with a strange mix of fear and sadness. Fear because of what he became capable of. Sadness because something clearly went very wrong long before that knife was ever picked up. That playground still exists. I've driven past it as an adult. The swings have been replaced. The paint is newer. The ground is covered in soft rubber instead of dirt. Kids still play there, laughing, running, living in that same bubble of safety I once felt. They have no idea what happened there, or who once stood on that same ground. And maybe that's for the best. When I was 14, I found a downed aircraft, first one there. That sentence still feels unreal when I say it out loud, even now. I was just a kid. I didn't have training, experience, or any real understanding of what I was about to walk into. I wasn't supposed to see something like that at that age, and yet it became one of those moments that quietly rewired my entire life. It was a small plane, a Cessna 150. I didn't know the model at the time. I just knew it was wrong. Planes aren't supposed to be where this one was. They aren't supposed to be silent, broken, and folded into the ground like discarded metal. I remember the smell first. Fuel, oil, something burnt, something sharp in the air that didn't belong in the place I was standing. At 14, you don't have the words for it yet, but your body knows. Your stomach tightens. Your chest feels heavy. Something inside you says, "This is bad." There were two men inside, grown men, fairly large men, and that's the part that still messes with my head when I think back on it. The impact had done things to them that I didn't understand then and still struggle to fully process now. They were small, smaller than they should have been. Small enough that later, when someone said they could both fit into a Yeti cooler, my brain immediately understood exactly what that meant. Dead serious, dead accurate, dead men. I was the first one there. That detail matters more than people realize. There was no one to guide me, no one to shield me from it, no one to say, "Don't look." So I looked. I saw everything. I took it all in because I didn't know not to. I didn't know that some images don't leave once you let them in. I didn't know that your brain doesn't forget things like that just because you want it to. I remember standing there feeling frozen, like my feet were glued to the ground. Time felt strange, too slow and too fast at the same time. I remember thinking I should do something, but I didn't know what something was. I was a kid, standing in front of death in its rawest form. No movie effects, no dramatic music, just silence and wreckage and bodies that were once people with lives, plans, families, and routines. Eventually, help came. Adults, professionals, people who knew what to do. But by then, the damage was already done. I had seen it, I had absorbed it, and without realizing it, something inside me locked onto that moment and never fully let go. That crash didn't just end 2 lives, it quietly redirected mine. I went into search and rescue later on. Not right away, not because I consciously decided this is my calling. It was more like gravity. I kept being pulled toward it, toward emergencies, toward places where things had gone wrong, toward moments where people needed help, answers, recovery, closure. On the surface, it made sense. I had already seen the worst, right? I knew what it looked like when things ended badly. Maybe I could help prevent that for someone else. Maybe I could be useful in those moments. And for a while, it worked. Search and rescue gives you structure, purpose, clear goals. You train, you prepare, you respond. You focus on tasks, coordinates, procedures. You tell yourself that professionalism creates distance, that training makes it manageable. You learn how to move through scenes efficiently, how to compartmentalize, how to keep your face neutral and your voice steady. But here's the part people don't always talk about. Shit catches up with you, not all at once. Not in some dramatic breakdown moment where everything explodes. It's quieter than that, slower. It creeps in through cracks you didn't know were there. A smell that takes you back somewhere you don't want to be. A sound that hits wrong. A random image in your head when you're trying to fall asleep. A heaviness in your chest that doesn't belong to today, but insists on tagging along anyway. You start noticing changes. Maybe your sleep gets worse. Maybe you're always tired but never really resting. Maybe you're more irritable than you used to be, or strangely numb to things that should matter. Maybe you laugh at stuff that shouldn't be funny, or feel nothing when something should hurt. Maybe you get really good at functioning while quietly falling apart. For me, that first crash never left. It became the foundation layer under everything else I saw later. Every recovery, every body, every bad outcome stacked on top of that 14-year-old version of me standing alone next to a broken plane. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was building a mental warehouse of things no kid should ever have to store. And the worst part is that when you work in search and rescue, people often praise you for being strong. They say things like, "I don't know how you do it," or "You must have a thick skin." What they don't see is that strength doesn't mean immunity. Thick skin doesn't mean nothing gets through. It just means you keep showing up even when parts of you are quietly eroding. There are things I've seen since then that I won't describe, not because they're unique, but because they're familiar to anyone who's done this kind of work. Accidents, recoveries, scenes where you know instantly that the outcome is final. Scenes where families are waiting somewhere nearby, not knowing yet that their world is about to split into a before and an after. You carry all of that with you, whether you want to or not. Sometimes I think back to that 14-year-old kid and wonder what would have happened if someone else had arrived first. If I had been shielded from it. If I had been told to stay back. Would I still have gone into search and rescue? Maybe, maybe not. But I do know that seeing death that young, that up close, without context or support, changes how your brain learns to process danger, responsibility, and loss. Even now, years later, there are moments when it hits me out of nowhere. I'll be doing something completely normal, something safe and ordinary, and suddenly I'm right back there. The smell, the silence, the realization that those men were never getting up. It doesn't come with panic every time. Sometimes it's just a dull weight, like a reminder tapping me on the shoulder saying, "Remember, this is part of you. I don't regret the work I've done. I've helped people. I've brought answers to families. I've been part of teams that did real good in real bad situations. But I won't pretend it doesn't cost something. It always does. And the bill doesn't arrive right away. It shows up years later in your sleep, in your relationships, in how your body reacts to stress, in how your mind handles quiet moments. That first crash taught me something I wish I hadn't learned so early. That life can end suddenly, violently, and without meaning. And once you know that, you never unknow it. You just learn how to live alongside it. So, yeah, I found a downed aircraft at 14. First one there. 2 men who could both fit into a cooler. Dead serious. And I've been carrying that moment with me ever since. Back when my son was around 6 months old, something happened that still unsettles me whenever I think about it. Even now, years later, the memory comes back in flashes, usually late at night when the house is quiet and everyone is asleep. At the time, I didn't fully understand how deeply it would stay with me, but looking back, I realize it changed the way I think about safety, instinct, and how close danger can come without leaving any clear answers behind. We were living in an upstairs flat back then. It wasn't a big place, but it was home. The kind of place where you learn every sound it makes, every creak in the floor, every little noise that tells you whether something is normal or not. By that point, we had already settled into the rhythm of life with a baby. Our son slept in a cot in our bedroom, close enough that I could hear his breathing at night. My husband and I were exhausted most of the time, like most new parents, and when we slept hard. That night started out completely ordinary, almost forgettable. Earlier in the evening, my husband and I had a silly argument. Nothing serious, nothing dramatic. Just one of those small disagreements that feel bigger than they really are when you're tired and stretched thin. I remember feeling annoyed and restless, and I decided to take a short walk to the shop to cool off. It wasn't unusual for me to do that. A quick walk, some fresh air, a chance to clear my head. I went alone, walking down familiar streets, passing the small park nearby. It was quiet, the kind of quiet you don't really think about until later. I didn't feel scared at the time. I wasn't watching over my shoulder or rushing. I was just a tired new mother trying to shake off a bad mood. When I got back, things were fine. The argument was already forgotten. We talked a bit, checked on the baby, and eventually went to bed. Normally, we were very careful about locking the front door. It was almost automatic, but that night somehow it didn't happen. My husband forgot to lock it before coming to bed. It was such a small thing, such an easy mistake, and one we didn't realize until much later. I fell asleep like I usually did, deeply and quickly. I've always been a heavy sleeper, the kind of person who can sleep through storms, alarms, and noise. That's one of the reasons what happened next still feels so strange to me. At some point during the night, I woke up, not suddenly, not with a jolt, but slowly. like my body sensed something before my mind caught up. I remember lying there in the dark, confused, trying to understand why I was awake at all. Then I heard it, the sound of someone creeping up the stairs. It wasn't loud. It wasn't clumsy. It was careful, measured. Each step placed with intention, like whoever it was didn't want to be heard. That alone sent a wave of fear through me. Our stairs had a certain sound to them. I knew how they creaked when someone walked normally. This was different. My heart started pounding immediately. I stayed completely still, barely breathing, listening as hard as I could. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. I remember thinking very clearly that this wasn't a dream. I was fully awake. Every sense felt sharp, alert in a way I had never experienced before. The bedroom door opened. I couldn't see much in the dark, just a shape, a presence moving into the room. The person didn't speak. They didn't fumble or bump into anything. They moved quietly, confidently, as if they knew exactly where they were going. I could feel my entire body tense. My son was right there in his cot. My husband was asleep beside me. In that moment, my mind raced through 1,000 possibilities, none of them good. The person stood there for a moment. I don't know how long, but it felt like forever. I remember thinking that if they took one more step, if they made one sudden move, I would scream. Or maybe I wouldn't. I honestly don't know. Fear does strange things to you. Then, just as quietly as they had come in, they turned around. I listened as they walked back out of the bedroom, down the stairs, and out through the front door. The door opened and closed softly. No running, no panic, just gone. I lay there frozen for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. I didn't wake my husband right away. I don't know why. Maybe I was trying to convince myself it hadn't happened. Maybe I was afraid that if I spoke, it would make it real. Eventually, I shook him awake and told him what I'd heard. He jumped up immediately, checked the flat, checked the front door. That's when we realized it had been unlocked. Nothing was missing. Nothing was disturbed. There was no sign of forced entry. No mess, no obvious evidence that anyone had been there at all. We called the police. They came out and took our statement. They were calm, professional, but clearly not overly concerned. They told us it was probably a drunk person who had walked into the wrong flat by mistake, someone confused, someone who realized they were in the wrong place and left. On the surface, that explanation made sense. It was simple. It didn't require anything darker or more frightening. But something about it didn't sit right with me. I couldn't stop thinking about how quiet the person had been, how deliberate their movements were. If someone was drunk enough to wander into the wrong home, would they really be able to move like that? Wouldn't they stumble, make noise, knock something over? Wouldn't there be some sign of confusion? The next day made everything worse. I received a message on Facebook from a woman who lived a couple of streets away. I didn't know her personally, but we had mutual connections. She told me that she had been sexually assaulted the week before, in the park I had walked past that night when I went to the shop. Reading that message made my stomach drop. Suddenly, everything felt connected in a way I didn't want to believe. My walk alone, the unlocked door, the quiet footsteps, the bedroom, my baby. The timing was too close, too uncomfortable to ignore. I started replaying the night over and over in my head. I wondered if someone had seen me walking alone and assumed I lived alone. I wondered if they had followed me home, watched which building I went into. I wondered if they came back later, expecting an empty flat, only to find a sleeping family instead. Did seeing my husband and my son make them stop? Did it scare them off? Or had they never intended to do anything more than look? There were no answers. There still aren't. The police explanation remained the same. No further incidents were reported in our building. Life moved on, as it always does, but I didn't move on in the same way. For a long time after that, I struggled to sleep. Every sound at night made my heart race. I checked the locks repeatedly before bed, sometimes getting up more than once to make sure the door was secure. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, of who was behind me when I walked, of shadows and movement. I felt angry too. Angry at myself for walking alone. Angry that the door had been left unlocked. Angry that something so frightening could be brushed off so easily. Mostly, though, I felt unsettled. There was something deeply disturbing about how close someone had come to us without leaving anything behind. No fingerprints, no proof. Just the memory of footsteps in the dark. Even now, I don't know what really happened that night. Maybe it truly was a drunk person who made a mistake. Maybe it was someone with worse intentions who changed their mind at the last second. Maybe it was pure chance. What I do know is that my body woke me up for a reason. That instinct, that sudden awareness, is something I trust now in a way I didn't before. And I know how thin the line can be between an ordinary night and something much worse. It was weird. It was upsetting. And it's something I'll probably carry with me for the rest of my life. When I was hitchhiking around the western United States, I met a couple that I still think about all these years later. I don't remember exactly where we crossed paths, only that it was somewhere remote, the kind of place where the land feels endless and people drift through without leaving much of a trace. They were an older couple, rough around the edges, the kind of people you might describe as redneck travelers. Both of them drank heavily, and it showed in the way they talked, laughed, and carried themselves. They had that restless, drifting energy, like they had been on the road for a long time and didn't really belong anywhere anymore. We ended up talking because that's what hitchhikers do. You share stories, sometimes deeply personal ones, with complete strangers, because you know you'll probably never see each other again. There's a strange intimacy in that. People tell you things they might never tell someone they actually know. This was one of those conversations. At some point, the topic turned to strange or disturbing things we'd seen while traveling. I don't remember who brought it up first, but eventually they told me a story that still unsettles me, even now, more than a decade later. At the time, I remember feeling this slow, creeping sense of dread as they talked, like something heavy settling in my chest. It wasn't the way they told it, either. They weren't dramatic. They weren't emotional. They told it casually, almost offhandedly, as if it were just another weird thing that happened on the road. They said that one evening, while hitchhiking themselves, they had gotten dropped off by a ride somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. It was getting dark, and they had no clear plan for where they were going to sleep. Anyone who has traveled like that knows the feeling. Night comes fast, and suddenly, you're very aware of how alone you are. As they walked along the road, they spotted an old farmhouse set back from the highway. It looked abandoned, the kind of place you see all over rural America if you know where to look. The paint was peeling, the windows were dark, and the land around it was overgrown. No lights, no signs of recent life. Just a structure slowly being reclaimed by time. They figured it might be a place to take shelter for the night. They weren't planning to steal anything, they said. They just wanted a roof, 4 walls, and maybe a floor that wasn't completely exposed to the elements. They walked up to the house and tried the door. To their surprise, it was unlocked. They went inside. At first, they said, it just felt like any other abandoned building. Dust, decay, that stale smell that old places get when they've been closed up for years. The kind of silence that feels thick, like the house itself is holding its breath. They moved through the rooms slowly, calling out just in case someone was there, though they didn't really expect anyone to answer. Then they found the bedroom. This is the part that still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. In that room, tied to a bed, they found the body of a woman. She had clearly been dead for a long time. Her body was decayed far beyond anything recent. The way they described it, there was no doubt that she had been violently murdered. The restraints were still there. The scene was unmistakable. They didn't go into graphic detail, but they didn't need to. The image was horrifying enough without it. A woman alone, tied to a bed in a farmhouse that no one had checked on for who knows how long, left there to rot, forgotten by the world. They said they panicked. They didn't touch anything. They backed out of the house and left as quickly as they could. They walked away and found somewhere else to sleep that night, somewhere outdoors, far from that place. And then they did nothing. They didn't call the police. They didn't tell anyone. They didn't report the location. They just kept traveling. When they told me this, I remember feeling this surge of disbelief and anger. I asked them why. Why wouldn't you report something like that? Why wouldn't you at least tell someone where it was? Their answer was simple and, to me, deeply disturbing. They said they didn't want to get blamed. They were afraid the police would suspect them, that they'd get tangled up in something they didn't want to deal with. They said it like it was obvious, like it was the most reasonable decision in the world. But the more I think about it, the less sense that explanation makes. They had never been in the area before that day. They were passing through. The body had clearly been there a long time. Any basic investigation would have shown that. Still, fear won out over responsibility. What haunts me the most isn't just the image of that woman, though that alone is enough to keep me up at night sometimes. It's the thought of what their silence meant. Because of their choice, that woman may still be there, or at least she may have been there for years longer than she should have been. Her remains left in that farmhouse, exposed to animals, weather, and decay, without dignity or peace. I think about her family, if she had one. Parents, siblings, children, friends, people who may have wondered what happened to her, people who may have searched, held on to hope, imagined scenarios where she might still be alive somewhere. Birthdays passing, holidays coming and going, that quiet, ongoing grief of not knowing, and all the while her body was lying in an abandoned farmhouse, discovered by two strangers who chose to walk away. That's the part that really upsets me, even all these years later. Not just the violence of her death, but the way she was denied closure afterward. How close answers may have been, and how easily they were lost again. I've tried, over the years, to rationalize it. To tell myself that people react badly under shock. That fear can make people do selfish things. That not everyone has the strength or clarity to do the right thing in moments like that. But no matter how I frame it, it still feels wrong. There's something deeply unsettling about knowing that someone's final resting place, their last trace in the world, might still be unknown because two people decided it was safer for themselves to stay quiet. It makes you realize how fragile justice can be, how dependent it is on ordinary people choosing to speak up. Sometimes I wonder if that farmhouse was ever found, if someone else stumbled across it later and reported it, if that woman was eventually identified, given her name back, laid to rest properly, or if she's still just another missing person, another unresolved case, another quiet tragedy buried in the vastness of rural America. I'll never know. I don't know where that farmhouse was. I don't know her name. I don't even remember the couple's names. All I have is the story, burned into my memory, and the lingering sense of sadness and anger that comes with it. It's strange how secondhand stories can haunt you almost as much as things you've seen yourself. I wasn't there. I didn't see her. But knowing that this happened, knowing how close the truth came to being uncovered, and how easily it slipped away again, stays with me. Even now, more than 15 years later, I still think about her sometimes, about the life she must have had before that farmhouse, about the fear she must have felt, about the silence that followed, and I hope, wherever she is now, that she's found some kind of peace, even if the world failed her in the end. A few years ago, when my family did a house blessing after moving in, we invited a few close friends over. It was meant to be a happy, peaceful occasion. We prayed together, ate dinner, talked late into the night, and eventually decided to sleep over instead of everyone going home so late. A couple of my friends and I slept in the room next to the dining room. It felt normal and comfortable at the time, nothing strange at all. The night passed quietly, at least for me. I slept through it without waking up, and when morning came, everything seemed fine. We all woke up, got ready, and started talking about random things while having breakfast. That's when one of my friends pulled me aside and told me something that immediately made my stomach drop. She said she had woken up in the middle of the night for no clear reason. She wasn't thirsty. She didn't need the bathroom, and she hadn't heard any noise. She just suddenly woke up. When she opened her eyes, she saw a black figure standing near the bathroom door. Not a shadow from the light, not someone walking past, but a solid, dark figure. She said it wasn't moving, just standing there. She froze, too scared to speak or move, and after what felt like a long time, she closed her eyes and forced herself to go back to sleep. She told me she didn't say anything that night because she didn't want to scare anyone, especially during a house blessing. Hearing her say this the next morning really shook me. That bathroom door is clearly visible from where we were sleeping, and there was no logical reason for anyone to be standing there. Everyone had been asleep, and no one had gotten up during the night. Even though I didn't see anything myself, her story stayed with me. Ever since then, I've never felt completely comfortable with that room. Whenever I'm alone in the house, I make sure the door to that room is closed. I also keep all the lights on, even during the day sometimes. It's not that I fully believe something is there, but I also can't forget what she told me. That one story changed how I feel in my own house. Nothing else has ever happened, but the fear is still there in the back of my mind. Sometimes just knowing something might be there is enough to make you uneasy. I was very young when this happened, around 7 years old, but the memory has stayed with me in a way that most childhood memories don't. It's not dramatic in the way some stories are. There was no sound, no figure in the room, no obvious danger, and maybe that's why it has stayed with me for almost 30 years. There was nothing to fight, nothing to explain away easily, just something quietly wrong. I remember going to bed the night before like any other night. It wasn't a special day, nothing stressful or exciting that I can recall. I was a normal kid, tired from school and play, and my bedtime routine was the same as always. Pajamas on, teeth brushed, maybe a short conversation with one of my parents, then into bed. My bed was against the wall, positioned in a way that felt familiar and safe. I slept on one side, always the same side, facing the same direction. Kids are creatures of habit, and I definitely was. I don't remember any dreams from that night. No nightmares, no strange images, nothing that stands out. As far as I know, I fell asleep normally and stayed asleep. No waking up in the middle of the night, no fear, no sounds, just sleep. When I woke up in the morning, something felt off immediately. Before I even opened my eyes fully, there was a strange sense of confusion, like my body knew something wasn't right before my mind caught up. When I opened my eyes, I realized I was facing the wrong direction. The wall I usually saw wasn't there. Instead, I was looking at the opposite side of the room. At first, I thought I was just disoriented. That happens sometimes when you wake up as a kid. I remember thinking maybe I had rolled over in my sleep. But then I became more aware of my surroundings, and that's when the confusion turned into something heavier. I wasn't just turned around. I was on the opposite end of the bed entirely. My head was where my feet were supposed to be. I sat up slowly, trying to understand what I was seeing. The bed was perfectly made, not messy, not half-fixed, not the way a kid's bed usually looks after a night of sleep. The sheets were pulled tight and tucked neatly under the mattress. The pillows were placed at the end of the bed, arranged carefully, like someone had intentionally made the bed that way. It looked exactly like how the bed would look if someone had made it in the morning, except I was inside it. That's the part that still unsettles me the most. It wasn't like the blankets were twisted or bunched up, which would make sense if I had moved around in my sleep. There were no wrinkles, no signs of movement. The sheets were smooth. The corners were tucked in. The pillows weren't just moved. They were placed properly, like someone knew how the bed was supposed to look. And I was lying on top of all of it, perfectly positioned, as if that had always been the way the bed was arranged. I remember sitting there for a long moment, just staring, trying to make sense of it. My first instinct wasn't fear, it was confusion. Deep, quiet confusion. I tried to replay the night in my head, wondering if I could have done this myself. Could I have gotten up, made the bed, turned it around, and climbed back in without waking up? Even at 7 years old, I knew that didn't make sense. I wasn't the kind of kid who made my bed, especially not neatly, and even if I had somehow done it in my sleep, how would I have tucked the sheets so tightly under the mattress? How would I have moved the pillows and arranged them properly? How would I have done all of that without disturbing anything? I got out of bed slowly, half expecting something else strange to happen, but nothing did. The room was normal. The house was quiet in the way it usually was in the morning. Sunlight came through the window the same way it always did. There were no signs that anyone had been in my room during the night. I went to find my parents and told them what happened. I remember trying to explain it clearly, even though I didn't really have the words for it. I told them I woke up on the wrong side of the bed and that the bed was made differently. They listened, but like most adults hearing something strange from a child, they didn't take it too seriously. They suggested I must have moved in my sleep. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe I was imagining things. They weren't dismissive in a cruel way, but they didn't see it as something important. To them, it was probably just a kid being confused in the morning. But it didn't feel like that to me. I knew how my bed usually looked when I woke up. I knew how it felt to roll around in my sleep. This was different. This felt deliberate, ordered, intentional. What made it worse was that nothing like it ever happened again. If it had happened multiple times, maybe I could have blamed sleepwalking or some kind of habit I didn't know I had. But it was a one-time event. Just that single morning, frozen in my memory. As I grew older, I tried to explain it logically. I revisited it in my mind at different stages of my life, each time with a new perspective. As a teenager, I wondered if I had been pranked. But that didn't make sense either. No one admitted to it, and why would someone go through the effort of making a bed so carefully just to confuse a child? As an adult, I considered sleep disorders, sleepwalking, night terrors, dissociation. I read about people doing complex tasks while asleep, but even then, something didn't sit right. Most sleepwalking stories involve messy, clumsy actions, not careful, precise movements. And again, why only once? I also thought about memory. Could I be remembering it wrong? Could my mind have exaggerated the neatness of the bed over time? That's a possibility I can't fully rule out. Memory is unreliable, especially childhood memory. But the feeling attached to that memory hasn't changed. The certainty that something was wrong has stayed the same. What bothers me most isn't fear, but the lack of an answer. There's no clear explanation that fits perfectly. It sits in that uncomfortable space between ordinary and unexplainable. Not dramatic enough to be a ghost story, not logical enough to be dismissed completely. Sometimes I wonder if moments like that are just small cracks in our understanding of reality. Little reminders that there are things we don't fully grasp, even in our own lives. Or maybe it was just a strange coincidence, a rare moment where my body and environment aligned in a way that made no sense. I've talked about it with people over the years. Most react the same way my parents did back then. They shrug it off, suggest sleepwalking, or laugh it off as a weird childhood memory. And I understand that reaction. If someone told me this story, I'd probably try to explain it away too. But living with the memory is different than hearing it. Even now, decades later, I sometimes think about that morning when I wake up in a hotel bed or an unfamiliar place. There's a brief moment where I check my surroundings, making sure everything is as it should be. Making sure I'm where I'm supposed to be. That one quiet, strange morning taught me something without words, that sometimes things happen without explanation. Not everything leaves evidence. Not everything comes with an answer. And sometimes the most unsettling experiences are the ones that are calm, silent, and impossible to prove. I don't know what happened that night. I don't claim it was something supernatural. I don't claim it wasn't. All I know is that I woke up as a child in a bed that had been carefully rearranged, with no memory of how it happened, and that feeling of quiet unease has never fully left me, and maybe it never will. Pardon the interruption for just a moment. I hope these stories are keeping you on the edge of your seat tonight. If you're finding yourself drawn to these dark accounts, I'd love to have you join us. If you're new here, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We share new, true horror stories every single day, and being part of the community is the only way to make sure you never miss a nightmare. A quick like and a comment also means a lot. It really helps the shadows spread a little further. But for now, let's get back to it. The darkness is calling. Growing up, there was a place near our neighborhood that everyone knew about, even if they pretended not to. It was called the Devil's Den. The name alone was enough to make parents uneasy and kids curious. It sat less than a mile away from our homes, tucked into a stretch of woods that followed a creek. You could walk there if you wanted, bike there if you were brave, or ride dirt bikes if you didn't care about trespassing or scraped knees. It was close enough to feel familiar, but far enough to feel separate from normal life. No one really knew what the place was supposed to be. That was part of what made it so unsettling. Adults would say it was an abandoned project, something that was started decades ago and never finished. Some said it was meant to be part of a water management system for the creek. Others claimed it was supposed to be a shelter or a foundation for a building that never got approved. There were no signs, no records anyone could point to, just stories passed down and changed slightly every time they were told. If you walked into the woods from the main path, the first thing you'd notice was how quiet it got. The trees were thicker there, and the light seemed to dim even during the day. After a short walk, you'd come across concrete steps going down into what looked like nothing. They were old, cracked, and half covered in moss and leaves. The steps led down to a small clearing where several concrete pillars stood in a rough pattern like the remains of something important that had been stripped away. On top of those pillars sat the structure everyone talked about. It was a hollow, cube-shaped stone building, completely walled in on all sides except for an opening you could climb into. The strangest part was that it didn't sit on the ground. It was raised up, balanced on those pillars like it was meant to be protected from whatever was below it. Inside that stone cube was a dead tree. No leaves, no bark in places, just a twisted, lifeless trunk reaching upward, trapped inside concrete. When we were kids, the rumors filled in all the blanks that reality didn't explain. People said it was used for devil worship. Others said goths or cults hung out there at night. Some claimed animals were sacrificed there. There were stories about chanting, candles, strange symbols painted on the walls. Whether any of that was true didn't really matter. The place already felt wrong, and the rumors just gave that feeling a name. At first, it was just a dare spot, somewhere you went with friends to prove you weren't scared. You'd go during the day, laugh a little too loud, make jokes to cover up how uneasy you felt. Some kids would tag the walls with graffiti. Others would leave behind junk, broken bottles, spray paint cans, scraps of fabric. Every now and then, you'd see symbols that didn't look like random vandalism. Circles, crosses turned upside down, words you didn't recognize. Most people brushed it off as kids trying to be edgy. Then something happened that changed how everyone looked at the Devil's Den. One day, a teenage boy took 2 of his friends there. They were all kids from the area, people you might have seen at school, at the gas station, riding bikes around town. What was supposed to be just another trip into the woods ended in violence. The boy murdered both of his friends with a knife. The details spread fast, even if they weren't all accurate. What mattered was that 2 kids went into that place and never came back alive. It shook the entire area. Parents who had always warned their kids about the Devil's Den suddenly had proof that it wasn't just a creepy hangout. It was dangerous. The woods were searched. Police tape went up for a while. News vans came and went. Eventually, things quieted down, but the feeling never really left. After that, the place seemed to attract more darkness, or maybe people just started paying closer attention. To this day, it feels like every year or two, someone is killed there or very close to it. Sometimes it's officially connected to the Devil's Den. Sometimes it's just nearby, close enough that people lump it together. Accidents, violence, disappearances, rumors of things that never quite get explained. The woods seem to hold on to those stories. If you really look around now, you can still find signs that people are using the place for something more than just exploring. Graffiti comes and goes, but some of it clearly isn't random. There are symbols that look intentional, repeated over time. You'll see small totems made of sticks and string, tied together and hung from branches. Sometimes there are candles melted down to nothing, wax pooled on rocks or concrete. Every once in a while, there's something worse. I've personally stumbled across things out there that made my stomach drop. One time I saw dolls hanging from a tree. They were undressed, stripped down to bare plastic. Some were Barbies, others were Monster High dolls. They were hung by their hair, dangling from branches like ornaments on a twisted Christmas tree. They swayed slightly in the breeze, clicking softly against the bark. There was no one around, no sound except the wind and the creek in the distance. I didn't stop to investigate. I didn't take pictures. I didn't try to make sense of it. I turned around and got out of there as fast as I could. The fear wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet and heavy, the kind that tells you something is very wrong and you shouldn't be there to find out what it is. What makes it even stranger is that during the day, the place can feel almost normal. People still ride dirt bikes through the trails. Hikers pass through without knowing the history. Sunlight hits the concrete and stone, and for a moment, it just looks like another abandoned structure in the woods. But that feeling never fully goes away. It's like the place is waiting for night, waiting for someone to be alone, waiting for the wrong person to wander in. There's a YouTuber named Brandon Buckingham who did an urban legend video about the Devil's Den with Wendigoon. Seeing it on video was surreal. The same steps, the same pillars, the same raised stone cube with the dead tree inside. They even got footage of the tree standing there like it's always been, silent and unmoving. Watching someone else walk through it didn't make it feel safer. If anything, it made it feel more real. I still ride out there occasionally, Old habits die hard, and the trails are familiar. I tell myself it's fine because it's daytime, because I'm not alone, because nothing has ever happened to me personally. But every now and then, something shifts. The woods get too quiet. The air feels heavy. You notice something new that wasn't there before, or something old that looks disturbed. That's when it stops feeling harmless again. The Devil's Den isn't scary in the way haunted houses or horror movies are scary. There are no jump scares, no guaranteed moments of terror. It's worse than that. It's slow, it's subtle. It's the kind of place where bad things have happened, and where people with bad intentions seem drawn to it. Whether that's coincidence, psychology, or something darker, doesn't really matter. What matters is that the place has a history, and that history hasn't ended. Even now, years later, just thinking about it gives me that same uneasy feeling I had as a kid. The kind that makes you check over your shoulder, that makes you listen a little harder to the sounds around you. During the day, it's just woods and concrete, until it isn't. And once you've felt that shift, you never really forget it. My mom was actually on the jury for this case, and even though I was just a kid at the time, the whole thing left a mark on me that never really faded. I remember one specific moment very clearly. We were in the car together when news started spreading that a body had been discovered up the highway. I didn't fully understand what that meant at the time, but I remember the sound. Sirens. So many sirens. It felt like they were everywhere all at once, echoing through the air. I had never heard anything like that before in my life. Even as a child, I knew something terrible had happened. The adults around me were tense and quiet, and that alone was enough to make it feel heavy and frightening. As I got older, my mom slowly shared more details with me. Not all at once and never in a sensational way, but enough over the years that I began to understand the full scope of what had happened. Hearing those details didn't just scare me in the way horror movies are supposed to scare you. It changed the way I looked at fear altogether. One of the biggest things it did was completely ruin horror movies for me. Monsters, aliens, cursed objects, haunted houses, none of that ever really got to me after that. Because real life is so much worse in a quieter, more unsettling way. There aren't demons or ancient creatures lurking in the shadows. Most of the time, the real danger comes from other people. Ordinary-looking humans who live normal lives, hold jobs, smile at neighbors, and still do unimaginable things. Once that realization sets in, fake scares just don't hit the same anymore. But the deeper impact came from one specific detail my mom eventually told me. The man involved in the case, the one connected to the murder, had worked at the Boys and Girls Club in South Lake Tahoe. That detail lodged itself deep in my brain, especially because I was still in my preteen years when I learned it. Up until then, places like daycare centers, after-school programs, and youth clubs felt safe by default. They were supposed to be safe. Adults who worked there were supposed to be trustworthy. Hearing that someone capable of such violence had been in a position caring for children shattered that sense of automatic safety for me. I want to be clear, and I've always tried to remind myself of this. I know logically that not all childcare workers are bad people. In fact, the vast majority of them are kind, patient, and genuinely care about kids. I understand that on a rational level, but anxiety doesn't always listen to logic. Learning that detail at such a young age planted a seed of fear that never really went away. Even now, it affects me. The idea of daycare, babysitters, or any situation where children are left in the care of people they don't know, well, still makes my chest tighten. There's always that quiet voice in the back of my head asking, what if? What if someone slips through the cracks? What if you don't see the signs until it's too late? That case taught me, far too early, that evil doesn't always look evil. It doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it wears a uniform, holds a job meant to help others, and blends right in. And once you learn that lesson, it's incredibly hard to unlearn it. So while I don't jump at scary movies or ghost stories, real-world stories like this still get to me. They shape how I see people, how I think about safety, and how cautious I am with trust. It's strange how something you didn't even directly experience can still leave such a deep, lasting imprint on your life. That jury case wasn't just something my mom was involved in. In a way, it quietly shaped who I became, how I understand fear, and why certain anxieties have followed me into adulthood. The rape of Nanking is one of those historical events that feels almost impossible to fully process, no matter how much you read about it. Every time it comes up, it hits like a punch to the chest, because the scale and cruelty of what happened goes far beyond what most people can even imagine humans being capable of. What makes it even more disturbing is exactly what you pointed out. The fact that a German visitor, an actual Nazi, was horrified enough by what he witnessed that he actively tried to protect Chinese civilians. When someone who represents one of history's most infamous regimes looks at what you're doing and says, "This is too much," it really puts into perspective just how extreme the violence was. It's not a comparison meant to soften Nazi crimes at all, but rather to underline how far beyond the line the Japanese soldiers went during that period. The brutality wasn't just about killing, it was systematic dehumanization, mass executions, widespread rape, torture, and cruelty carried out not in the heat of battle, but deliberately and repeatedly against civilians. Entire families were wiped out. Women were assaulted in front of their relatives. People were forced to watch loved ones die before being killed themselves. The violence became almost ritualistic, as if cruelty itself was the goal. The detail you mentioned about babies being thrown into the air and used for bayonet practice is one of the most haunting aspects of the massacre. It's one of those images that, once you learn about it, never really leaves your mind. It represents a complete collapse of any moral boundary. There's no military objective, no twisted logic that even tries to justify it. It's violence for the sake of violence, inflicted on the most defenseless human beings imaginable. What adds another layer of anger and disbelief is how little accountability there ultimately was. After World War II, only a small number of Japanese military leaders were convicted specifically for war crimes related to Nanking, and many perpetrators were never held responsible at all. Some went on to live quiet lives. Others returned to positions of influence. For the victims and their descendants, that lack of justice is another wound that never healed. Part of the reason this still feels so unresolved is that, for decades, the massacre was downplayed, denied, or glossed over in various ways. Even today, there are political tensions around acknowledging the full scope of what happened. That denial compounds the horror, because it feels like the victims were robbed not only of their lives, but also of the truth being universally recognized. It's one of those moments in history that forces you to confront the darkest side of humanity. Not monsters, not myths, not exaggerated villains, but ordinary people who chose to commit unimaginable acts. And that realization is often more disturbing than any horror movie or fictional story, because it actually happened. Remembering events like the rape of Nanking is painful, but it matters. Not to dwell in despair, but to understand what unchecked violence, nationalism, and dehumanization can lead to. Forgetting or minimizing it doesn't protect anyone. Acknowledging it, as horrifying as it is one of the few ways to honor the people who suffered and to remind ourselves what must never be allowed to happen again. On my first shift at my current job, I met a girl who was also starting that same day. It was one of those awkward first day situations where everyone is trying to look confident while secretly feeling nervous. I remember noticing her almost immediately because she looked extremely tense, like she was holding her breath all the time. Her shoulders were tight, her hands kept fidgeting, and her eyes kept darting around the room as if she was expecting something bad to happen at any moment. I've always been the kind of person who tries to make others feel comfortable, especially in new environments. So I decided to talk to her. I figured that if I could distract her a little or make her feel less alone, it might help calm her nerves. I introduced myself, asked her how she was feeling about the job, and tried to keep the conversation light and friendly. At first, she smiled politely, but it felt forced, like she was trying very hard to appear okay when she really wasn't. As we talked more, she started opening up. She told me she felt like everyone was staring at her, judging her, and thinking badly about her. She kept glancing around the room while saying this, her voice low and shaky. I remember feeling a bit concerned, but I assumed it was just extreme first-day anxiety. A lot of people feel self-conscious in new places, especially when they don't know anyone yet. I tried to reassure her gently. I told her that nobody was judging her, that everyone was probably just focused on their own first day and their own worries. I explained that I felt nervous too, even if I didn't show it, and that starting a new job is stressful for almost everyone. I could see her nodding as I spoke, but it didn't really seem to sink in. It was like her mind was stuck on a loop of fear that logic couldn't break. Not long after that conversation, things took a turn. We were still on shift when she suddenly started breathing very fast. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably, and she looked like she was about to cry. At first, I thought she might just need a moment to step outside or sit down, but it quickly became clear that it was more serious than that. She was having a full-blown panic attack. She couldn't catch her breath, and she kept saying that she felt like something terrible was going to happen. People around us started to notice, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. The owner of the company was called over, and after a brief conversation, he decided to give her a ride home himself. She looked completely overwhelmed, almost detached from reality, like she was there physically but not mentally present anymore. That was the last time I saw her at work. She never accepted another shift, and no one really talked about her after that. At the time, I assumed she had decided the job wasn't right for her, or that her anxiety was too much for her to handle in that environment. Life moved on, and I honestly didn't think about her much after that first day. A few months later, everything changed. I was scrolling through the news one day when I saw an article that immediately caught my attention. The name sounded familiar, and as I kept reading, my stomach dropped. It was her, the girl I had met on my first shift. The same girl who had been so anxious, so afraid, and so overwhelmed. The article said she had murdered her grandfather. I remember sitting there in complete shock, rereading the headline over and over again, hoping I had misunderstood something, but I hadn't. It was real. The girl I had tried to comfort, the girl who felt like everyone was watching and judging her, had gone on to commit a violent and tragic act. As more details came out, it became clear that she had been struggling with serious mental health issues for a long time. The signs were there, even during that first shift. Her paranoia, her intense anxiety, the way she seemed disconnected from reality at times. Looking back, it all made a lot more sense, but at the same time, it made the whole situation even more heartbreaking. I couldn't stop thinking about that first conversation we had. I kept replaying it in my head, wondering if there was something more I could have said or done. Logically, I know that a brief conversation with a coworker wasn't going to fix deep, untreated mental illness. But emotionally, it's hard not to wonder about the what-ifs. What if she had gotten help sooner? What if someone had recognized the severity of her condition earlier? The part that haunts me the most is how normal everything seemed on the surface. She wasn't aggressive. She wasn't threatening. She was just scared. Deeply, painfully scared. And yet, that fear, combined with untreated mental illness, eventually turned into something devastating. It also changed the way I look at people in general. You never really know what someone is dealing with internally. Someone can look quiet, anxious, or withdrawn, and behind that can be an entire world of pain, confusion, and fear that most people will never see. It made me realize how fragile the line is between coping and completely falling apart. I don't feel anger toward her. Mostly, I feel sadness. Sadness for her, sadness for her grandfather, and sadness for a system that failed to help someone who clearly needed serious support. Mental health resources are still so limited and often inaccessible, especially for people who don't know how or where to ask for help. That first shift at my job was supposed to be forgettable, just another day of learning routines and meeting coworkers. Instead, it became something I'll probably remember for the rest of my life, not because of the job itself, but because of the reminder it gave me about how complex, fragile, and unpredictable people can be. Every now and then, I still think about her. I think about that anxious girl who felt like the whole world was watching her, and I wonder what her life might have looked like if she had received the help she needed before everything went so wrong. Every year from 2018 to 2021, someone from my graduating class died. We were all from the class of 2012, which means we were still pretty young when it started happening. At first, it felt like a horrible coincidence. Then it kept happening, and after a while, it stopped feeling like coincidence at all. In 2018, the first one died. It was an accident. Sudden, random, the kind of thing you read about in the news and think, that's awful, but it could happen to anyone. I remember hearing about it and feeling shocked, but also distant in a strange way. I hadn't talked to that person in years. We had gone to school together, shared classrooms, hallways, assemblies, but life had moved on. Still, it hit differently knowing someone my age was just gone. No warning. No long illness. Just one moment alive. The next not. In 2019, it happened again. This time, it was cancer. That one shook me more. Cancer feels cruel in a different way. It's not instant. It lingers. It gives people time to hope, time to plan, time to believe they might beat it. I remember seeing posts online about treatments, about staying strong, about fighting. And then one day, those posts stopped. Instead, there were memorials, old photos, people writing things like "gone too soon" and "rest easy." That phrase started to feel heavier every time I saw it. What made 2019 especially unsettling for me was that not long before that classmate died, something almost happened to me. I was riding my bike, doing something completely normal. Something I had done countless times before. It was at a junction, nothing dramatic, nothing reckless. A garbage truck was going slowly, turning. The driver didn't see me. I didn't realize how bad it was until it almost was. I remember the sound first, the engine, the sheer size of the truck compared to me. I remember the feeling of being knocked off my bike, the ground coming up fast, my heart slamming against my ribs. Time slowed down in that awful way it does when something is about to go very wrong. I was on the road, right near the wheels. I didn't fully understand what was happening, only that I was in danger. Then a woman ran into the road. I didn't know her. I still don't. She came from nowhere, shouting, waving her arms, screaming at the driver to stop. If she hadn't done that, if she had hesitated even for a second, I would have been pulled under the wheels. I know that in my bones. I was about a second away from being crushed, from being another headline. Another tragic accident. The truck stopped. People rushed over. Someone asked if I was okay. I was shaking, but I was alive. I walked my bike to the side of the road, hands trembling so badly I could barely grip the handlebars. Everyone kept saying how lucky I was, how close it was, how it could have been so much worse. They were right. But ever since then, that moment has lived in my head like an echo that never fully fades. It wasn't just fear, it was the realization of how thin the line really is. 1 second earlier, 1 second later, and my life would have ended there, on an ordinary street, on an ordinary day. When my classmate died later that year, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept replaying the bike accident in my mind. I kept wondering why I was still here and they weren't. That question doesn't have a good answer. It never does. Then came 2020, another death. This time, COVID. He had a pre-existing condition which people kept mentioning, like that was supposed to make it easier to understand or accept. It didn't. It just made it feel even more unfair. We were all still young. We were supposed to be building lives, not losing them. By then, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Every year, someone from my class was gone. Different causes, no connection on paper, but the timing felt wrong. Too neat, too consistent. It started to feel like something was circling us, picking us off one by one. I know how that sounds. I know it's not logical, but fear doesn't care about logic. In 2021, the fourth one died. Suicide. That one broke something in me. Accidents and illness are terrifying, but suicide adds another layer of horror. It means someone was suffering so deeply, so quietly, or so loudly that they couldn't see another way out. It makes you look back at every interaction, every memory, and wonder what you missed. What signs were there? What could have been different? By that point, I wasn't just sad, I was scared. 4 years in a row, 4 classmates, 4 different causes, and I was still here carrying the memory of how close I had come to being one of them. That's when the thought crept in, the one I wish I could shake completely. It started to feel like a final destination curse. I know it sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud. I know movies aren't real. I know life doesn't work like that. But when you've watched people your age die year after year, when you've personally escaped death by seconds, your brain starts connecting dots that maybe aren't meant to be connected. I started thinking about timelines, about order, about whether something had been missed when I survived the bike accident. Like maybe I wasn't supposed to be here and something, somewhere, was keeping score. I hated that thought. I still do. But it lodged itself in my mind and refused to leave. I found myself becoming paranoid in small, quiet ways. Not full-blown panic, not constant fear, but a low-level tension that never fully relaxed. Every time I crossed a street, I was hyper-aware of cars. Every time I rode my bike, my heart beat faster than it should have. When the pandemic was at its worst, I was terrified of getting sick, not just because of the illness itself, but because it felt like my turn could be coming. I started noticing how often I thought about death. Not in a dramatic way, but in passing, like a background process, always running. I'd hear about an accident on the news and wonder how old the person was. I'd see an obituary and check the year of birth. I'd think, that could have been someone from my class. That could have been me. The worst part is that there's nothing tangible to fight against. You can't argue with coincidence. You can't reason with a feeling. You can tell yourself 1,000 times that these deaths were unrelated, that people die every day, that patterns exist because humans are good at finding them, not because they mean anything. And still, the unease remains. Sometimes I think back to that woman who ran into the road. I wonder who she was. What made her react so fast? Whether she ever thinks about it, or if it was just another moment in her day. For me, it split my life into before and after. Before, death felt distant. After, it felt personal. I don't walk around expecting to die. I don't live in constant fear. But there's a part of me that never fully relaxes anymore. A part of me that feels like I'm being watched by chance itself, like luck could run out at any moment. I've tried talking about it, but it's hard to explain without sounding irrational. People say things like, "That's just life," or "You can't think like that," or "It's just bad luck." And I know they're trying to help, but knowing something intellectually doesn't always make it feel true emotionally. The truth is, surviving something like that bike accident changes you. Watching people your age die year after year changes you. It makes the world feel less solid, less predictable. It makes safety feel temporary. I still think about those classmates, about who they were in school, about the futures they were supposed to have, about how none of us thought back in 2012 that by our late 20s so many names would already be crossed off. And I still think about how close I came. Some days the feeling fades into the background. Other days it comes back strong, especially when I hear about another death, another accident, another reminder that life doesn't follow rules or fairness. I don't actually believe there's a curse. Not really, but the feeling is there anyway. A quiet, persistent paranoia that whispers, "Stay alert, be careful, don't take anything for granted." Maybe that's the real aftermath. Not a supernatural force, but the lasting impact of realizing how fragile everything is. How quickly things can end. How survival can feel just as unsettling as loss. I'm still here. I try to live my life. I try not to let fear control me, but I won't lie and say it doesn't affect me at all. It does. And I don't know if that feeling will ever fully go away. One of my friends from high school went on to medical school. Back then, none of us really understood what that path actually involved beyond the obvious idea of learning how to save lives. We knew it was hard, intense, and emotionally demanding, but it all felt abstract to us. It was something that happened far away in textbooks and hospitals, not something that would ever circle back to our small hometown in a way that felt personal. At some point during his training, he reached the stage where they work with cadavers. I don't know all the technical details of what they do or how the process is structured, and honestly, I don't think I want to know everything. What I do know is that it's meant to teach future doctors about real human anatomy in a way that no diagram or model ever could. These are real people who donated their bodies to science, and the students are taught to treat them with respect and professionalism at all times. My friend talked about this part of med school very carefully. He wasn't someone who exaggerated or told stories for shock value. If anything, he was pretty reserved. When he finally told me what happened, it wasn't in a dramatic or excited way. It was quiet, serious, and heavy, like something he had been carrying around for a while and didn't quite know what to do with. During one of these cadaver sessions, he was assigned to work on a body like everyone else. The face was covered, which I guess is standard practice, partly out of respect and partly to help students emotionally distance themselves so they can focus on learning. Everything about the setup is designed to keep things clinical and controlled. As he was working, he noticed something familiar. There was a specific injury on the body. Something distinctive, not just a scar you could easily ignore, but a very particular injury with a story behind it. Back in our hometown, there had been a woman who was locally well known, not famous in a celebrity sense, but well known in the community. She gave talks, spoke at events, and shared her life story publicly. A big part of her story involved how she got that exact injury. It was something she talked about often, something that made her recognizable. When my friend saw it, it immediately triggered that memory. At first, he tried to dismiss it. The idea that someone from our hometown, someone he recognized, could be lying on a table in front of him felt impossible. Med school was supposed to be anonymous in that way. Bodies came from all over. The chances felt too small to even consider seriously. But the more he worked, the more that feeling grew. That quiet sense of recognition wouldn't go away. It wasn't just the injury itself, but how it looked, where it was, and how closely it matched what he remembered from her speeches. He started to feel unsettled. This wasn't just a vague resemblance anymore. It felt specific, personal, and deeply wrong in a way he couldn't shake. Eventually, curiosity and disbelief got the better of him. He knew he wasn't supposed to do it. He knew the rules were strict for a reason, but in that moment, he needed to know. He needed confirmation, even if it meant crossing a line. He peeked. When he told me this part, he paused for a long time. You could tell he still felt conflicted about it. He lifted the covering just enough to see her face, and immediately, he knew. It was her, the same woman from our hometown, the same face he had seen in community centers at events, telling her story, standing in front of crowds and talking about survival, pain, and resilience. The realization hit him hard. This wasn't just a cadaver anymore. This was a person with a voice, a history, a presence he remembered. Someone who had stood in front of people and spoken about her life was now lying silently on a table used as part of a lesson. He put the covering back immediately, but the damage was done. He couldn't unsee it. He couldn't go back to the emotional distance he had before. Everything felt different after that. He did get in serious trouble for peeking. Medical schools don't take that lightly, and for good reason. There are ethical boundaries that exist to protect both the dignity of the deceased and the mental well-being of the students. He accepted the consequences without arguing. In a way, I think he felt like he deserved them. What stayed with him wasn't just the shock of recognition, but the strange, uncomfortable collision of two worlds. The public version of this woman, the one who told her story and was known in our town, and the private, silent reality of her body after death. It forced him to confront the fact that every cadaver was once someone with a full life, relationships, memories, and a place in the world. He told me that after that day, he struggled more during those sessions, not because he couldn't handle the work, but because he couldn't stop thinking about who these people might have been. He became more careful, more respectful, almost painfully aware of the humanity behind the lessons. In a strange way, it made him a better student, but it also made things heavier. For me, hearing the story was unsettling in a completely different way. It made the idea of death feel closer, more real. This wasn't a distant news story or an abstract concept. This was someone from our hometown, someone we could have passed on the street, now reduced to a teaching tool. It wasn't wrong exactly, but it was deeply uncomfortable to think about. Even now, when I think about it, it gives me chills. Not because of anything supernatural or dramatic, but because of how thin the line is between being a living, breathing person with a story and becoming a body behind a curtain in a lab. One day you're standing in front of people explaining your scars, and another day those same scars are what identify you in death. My friend doesn't talk about it often anymore. It's one of those experiences that doesn't fade, but also doesn't need to be revisited constantly. It just sits there, quietly shaping how you see things. And every time I think about it, I'm reminded that behind every clinical process, every professional setting, there are human stories that don't disappear just because we stop seeing the faces. Thank you for spending your night with me. I hope these lullabies stay with you, but not too close. If you found these stories chilling, please like the video and subscribe to join the family. Every comment and sub helps us keep the darkness growing. Get as comfortable as you can, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Sweet dreams.